Okay, so welcome back everyone to Gemarah Sanhedrin. Last week we didn't have a shiur, but the week before, I'll just remind you what we were talking about. I'll get the Gemara on the screen straight away. It's page 85 if you're in the Steinsaltz. It is on 16b if you are in the Vilna Shas. Actually, it's on 16a right at the bottom, which is where we're going to start. So let's just, you got the screen there, I hope, yeah? Yeah, okay. So what we were trying to prove was that we need the Sanhedrin in order to go out to a war. We need the Sanhedrin's approval. Now, what kind of a war? Well, we're talking about the Milchemet Reshut, the discretionary war, as opposed to the Milchemet Mitzvah, the obligatory war. I'm sorry if you can hear that drilling in the background, but there's nothing I can do about it. So we'll just have to try and concentrate with that in the background. So we're trying to prove that we need the Sanhedrin's approval. Let me just answer Tally to say, no, I can't go and switch on the aircon. Right, so let's get rid of that. Now, have you still got the screen, or have I just mucked you up?
Got it.
Okay, right. So we had a suggestion that the Sanhedrin was required because of this funny story that happened with David HaMelech and his alarm clock. He had his harp hanging on the bed, above the bed, and at midnight the wind changes to the north and would cause the harp to play on its own through the wind, and as we said, this was the first radio alarm clock in recorded history, and it would wake him up and he would osek b'Torah, and he would busy himself with the Torah ad sha'ala amud hashachar, until dawn came, and then kivan sha'ala amud hashachar, when the dawn arrived, nichnasu chachmei Yisrael etzlo, his advisors, the wise people of Israel, would enter his room or enter his palace, and they would deal with their matters of state. And then they had this conversation, and they said, Adonenu HaMelech, our master the king, the people are hungry, they need food. And so he said to them, well, let the rich people feed the poor people. And they said, no, a handful is not enough to feed a lion, etc. A pit cannot fill itself, and we spoke about that. And so he says, all right, then we'll go out to war. And well, there were two versions, weren't there? One was go out to war and extend the borders. And another version was stop those people coming in and raiding the food stores of our people. Either way, it was a war. And then it says this: Miyad, immediately, Yoatzin ba'Achitophel. They took advice from this fellow called Achitophel, v'nimlachin b'Sanhedrin, and they consulted the Sanhedrin, v'shoalim ba'urim v'tumim, and then they went to the Kohen Gadol with the breastplate and the lighting up stones, and they asked the Urim v'tumim, which, as it were, is asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu's permission, as it were, to go out to war. Amar Rav Yosef says, that's all very well, that's a very nice story, but how do you know that? You know, you can't just pull it out of thin air. You have to have some kind of support for your story here. Ma'ikra, where is the verse in the Tanakh which proves what you're saying? And that's where we ended last time. There's a picture of the harp, which the north wind would blow. There's a picture of a water cistern that we spoke about. And there's the view from the Kidron Valley. Right. So we're now over the page. And this is the verse that is being used by the Gemarah to support the idea that Achitophel, the Sanhedrin, and the Urim V'Tumim were consulted. And it is a pasuk. We looked at the pasuk briefly last time in Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles, First Chronicles, chapter 27, verse 34. So I shall put that on the screen for you now, and we can see what we're talking about. There it is. Now, what we said last time was this was a list. Divrei Hayamim are the Chronicles. That's what it's called, Chronicles. It's basically a story of what was going on. Chronicles are the newspaper of the time, the Daily Chronicle, right? The Jewish Chronicle even. And that's what this was. These were what was going on. And this particular chapter is telling us who had what job. Verse 29 tells us that Sharon was the minister for cattle. Obil was the minister for donkeys, etc. Yehonatan, David's uncle, was a counselor. And verse 33, Achitophel was the king's counselor. Okay, there's a proof that it was that they would take advice from Achitophel. So we've proved that first bit of the Gemarah, which was that it said that they would take advice from Achitophel. And then verse 34, it says, and after Achitophel were Yehoiada, the son of Benaiah, and Evyatar, and the general of the king's army was Joab. Now, on the face of it, what this verse is telling us is that Achitophel was the king's counselor, and after him, in that role, was Yehoiada, the son of Benaiah, and Evyatar. Agreed? That's what that pasuk says. That's what it means, right? Well, the Gemarah interprets this pasuk completely differently. Art Scroll uses the word, interprets it homiletically, which is a fancy word for saying not in its most obvious form. So let's have a look now what the Gemarah actually, how the Gemarah looks at this pasuk. It seems a perfectly innocuous, boring, uninteresting pasuk that tells you who was the king's counselor and who was his successor and who was his successor's successor. These people, three people, Achitophel, Yehoiada, the son of Benaiah, and Evyatar. Okay, so now let's go back to the Gemarah. And I want you to tell me, when we go back to the Gemarah, look at this pasuk carefully, and I want you to tell me where spot the difference. You know those pictures that you get where you get 10 differences, you have to spot the difference. I usually manage to get about 7, and then the last 3 I can never find. Right? Well, this one's only one difference. Spot the difference. Here, we're going to go back to the Gemarah now. There we are. Right, so they quote the pasuk. V'achrei Achitophel, Benaiah ben Yehoiada ve'Evyatar, v'sar tzva lamelech Yoav. And after Achitophel was Benaiah, the son of Yehoiada, and Evyatar, semicolon, and the general of the king's army was Yoav. Right, where's the error? Who spotted the error? No one? David, have you spotted the error?
Yeah. The Gemarah says Ben Yehoiada, Ben Yehoyada, and the text in the Tanakh says Ben Benayahu.
Yes, it's the other way around. In the Tanakh, it says Yehoyada ben Benaiah. And here it says Benaiah ben Yehoyada. The other way around. The bottom line is that the Gemarah is wrong. It's a mistake. Now you'll say to me, why don't they just correct the mistake? Well, they do. Some versions have emended the Gemarah, but actually, whoever wrote the Gemarah out originally, one of the manuscripts was just the other way around. Nothing more exciting than that, I'm afraid. So we still have to explain how this pasuk helps us to know that in order to go out to war, they had to ask Achitophel, then the Sanhedrin, and then the Urim V'Tumim. Because as far as I can see, the Sanhedrin isn't mentioned, and neither is the Urim V'Tumim. And all this pasuk is telling us is the succession of advisors to the king. So how is it going to help us? Well, have a look at this. The Gemarah now goes into this pasuk and dissects it. Achitophel ze yoetz. Achitophel was the advisor, and Steinsaltz says whose counsel they sought first with regard to going out to war. Why? Why was Achitophel the person that they asked? Was he such a good war general? You'd have thought you'd ask Yoav first, wouldn't you? You'd ask your general first, I would have thought. But no, they ask Achitophel. Why? Because there is a pasuk in Shmuel Bet 16:23, as you can see here, which the Gemarah quotes. The Gemarah quotes the following pasuk. I'll show it to you. I'll show you the pasuk. I have it all ready for you. There it is. And have a look what it says. Va'atzat Achitophel asher ya'atz bayamim haheim. And the advice of Achitophel, who was giving out advice in those days, kasher yishal ish, when a man would inquire of him, bidvar Elohim, it was as if he'd asked God. So Achitophel's advice was considered so good that it was as if he'd asked God in those days. So David clearly held the advice of Achitophel in very high regard. The pasuk in Shmuel Bet, this where we're over here, this is in the time of David. This is where the story of David's life. So Achitophel was David's chief advisor, and he was so wise, he was considered as if you were asking God himself. Interestingly, in modern Hebrew, Atzat Achitophel is used in an ironic way to mean rubbish advice. So if somebody says to you, shall I take my umbrella this morning? And you say, no, it's not going to rain. And they don't take it and they get drenched because it does rain. They may well say to you, well, that was Atzat Achitophel that you gave me. So rather than it being as if you were asking God, in today, in modern parlance, if you use that expression, it means you were given poor advice. But here in the Gemarah, let's go back to the Gemarah. In the Gemarah, it means that Achitophel was the best advice you could possibly get. It was as if you were asking God. So that makes sense. Let's get the Gemarah back on. Now, so that's Achitophel. We've dealt with that, and that makes sense. Now, Benaiah ben Yehoyada, or the other way around, really, it should be Yehoyada ben Benaiah. Says our Gemarah, Zu Sanhedrin. This is the Sanhedrin. How do you get that? Okay, you'll have to wait a minute to find that out because it's going to tell you something else first. Evyatar elu urim v'tumim. Evyatar is the urim v'tumim. What on earth are we talking about here? We are trying to prove the veracity of this story that we saw at the end of the last page, that when David said, well, you better go out to war to feed the people, that immediately they sought advice from Achitophel, the Sanhedrin, and the Urim V'Tumim. That's what we're trying to prove. They bring a pasuk that says they took advice from Achitophel. Okay, that's sorted, no problem with that. And then they say, Benayaha ben Yohayada, that means the Sanhedrin. And Evyatar, that means the Urim V'Tumim. Well, you can't just say that, just pull that out of thin air. Explain yourself. That's what the Gemara is going to do now. V'chein, similarly, hu omer, and it says with regard to the position of Benayah, who ben Yehoyada, al hakreti va'al hapleti. He was above, over and above the Kreti and the Pleti. Okay, now who is this Kreti and Pleti? Let's have a look at the pasuk in its context. 2 Samuel 20:23. So let's have a look at that. Samuel 20:23. Let me just find it for you. There we go. Again, this is telling us, this is in Shmuel Bet now rather than Divrei Ayamim, but it's telling us who was doing what. And you've got the various jobs here. Yoav was over the entire army of Israel. He's the chief of staff. Benayaha ben Yehoyada. Notice that it's that way round and not not the other way around as it is in the Gemarah. I'm just going to have to stop for 1 second because there's a brisk going on in shul and they don't know how to put on the air conditioning. It is unbelievable. If I were to die, God forbid, nobody would know what the hell to do in this place. Just give me a second. Right. Hang on, I've just sent that to the wrong person. Right, okay, I'm turning that off. If I get any other messages, it's hard luck. Right, so he says here, Yoav was over the entire army of Israel. He was the chief of staff, and Benaiah was over the archers and slingers. Okay, hakareti va'ala pleti. So on the face of it, this pasuk is just telling you that this guy was head of the artillery brigade, right? So again, what's that got to do with the Sanhedrin? Well, we're really struggling here, aren't we? We're bringing pasuk after pasuk that doesn't seem to help us. Let's go back to the Gemarah and see what the Gemarah tells us about these pleti and kareti. The Gemarah explains this particular pasuk as follows: kareti. These are the Sanhedrin. They say the Sanhedrin was called Kareti and Peleti. In the pasuk, it's obviously referring to a brigade of the army, the archers and slingers, because it's talking about who's got what job. But the Gemarah homiletically uses these words to show that it means the Sanhedrin. Kareti, why are they Sanhedrin called Kareti? Shekortin divrehen. It's from the word karet. What's karet? Karate. Who knows what the word karate is? Go and ask Philip Lehrer. What's karate? Well,
a martial art.
Yes, it is a martial art. And the Hebrew word of karate, I think, is connected to the martial art, because the word karate means I have cut. Karet is a punishment that you get for eating in Yom Kippur and not eating the Korban Pesach. It's called karet, being cut off from your people, excommunicated in one way or another. Lichrot means to cut. So karate, I have cut, karate, yeah? That's why it's called karate. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds about right to me. Anyway, the word karate means to cut. So why is the Sanhedrin called karate? Shekortin divrehen. They cut very decisively, very carefully. They cut their words as if with a scalpel, as if with a surgeon's knife. They're very careful about the words. I know it's a bit of a dray, isn't it, this? I'm struggling a bit with this, but there you are. That's what the Gemarah says. Shekortin divrehem. Rav Steinsaltz says they were decisive. Shekortin, they cut in their pronouncements. And why were they called peleti? Peleti, what's a pele? The word pele. We say it every morning. We say it every morning in davening. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha neder b'kodesh, nora tehilot, oseh fele. Fele and pele is the same word. Fe and pei is just grammatically whether you have a dot in it or not. So what's it mean, the word pele or fele? What's it mean? Oseh fele, mi chamocha Adonai, who is like you, Hashem? Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, who is like you, wondrous in holiness? Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot, awesome is your praise. Oseh, who does? Fele, wondrous things. Pele is a wonder. If you say to somebody, wow, that's a pele, it means, wow, that's amazing. Oh, wondrous thing. So, upleti she mufla'in ma'asehen, because their actions and wisdom were wondrous. Bit stretched that really, but that's what the Gemarah says, that this pasuk that says B'nayahu ben Yehoyada was over the kareti and the pleti, the archers and the slingers, in the real context, homiletically is interpreted to mean that the B'nayahu ben Yehoyada was in charge of the Sanhedrin because he was so clever. He was in charge of the Sanhedrin. And so when David wanted to go out to war, they spoke to Achitophel because it was like speaking to God, and B'nayahu because he was at the head of the Sanhedrin. And then V'achar kach sar hatzva lemelech Yoav. And after that, they would speak to the king's army. Okay. So what about Evyatar? We haven't said anything about Evyatar, have we? Look at the pasuk. Achrei Achitophel up here. After Achitophel was B'nayahu ben Yehoyada. We've said that he is the Sanhedrin because he was over these kreti and pleti. Evyatar. Who was Evyatar? Anybody know? Have a guess. What are we missing in our thing here? We've got Achitophel, we've got the Sanhedrin. What was the third thing?
He was the Kohen Gadol.
Very good, Julia. You will definitely make a good detective. He is the Kohen Gadol. He was the Kohen Gadol. Evyatar was a Kohen Gadol. Does anybody know anybody called Evyatar? Jeffrey, you know somebody called Evyatar?
Evyatan?
Evyatar. There is somebody in our shul called Evyatar. In fact, he laned part of the Sedra last week. Evyatar is the name of the oldest son of Itzik Drucker.
Oh.
So not a very common name, I don't think. But anyway, Evyatar, who was a Kohen Gadol, they've named their son Evyatar. Does anybody know anybody called Benayahu? Yeah. Yes, you do, Jeffrey. There is somebody in our shul called Benayahu. Michael Kraus, you also know him. In fact, you sit near him. I shall not keep you in suspenders any longer. It is the oldest son of Rav Yuval. It's called Benayahu. So there you go. Two unusual names, both of which we have in our shul. So Evyatar was the Kohen Gadol. So obviously Evyatar represents the Urim V'Tumim. So somehow or other, the Gemara has schlepped out a homiletical interpretation of these two psukim to show that in order to go out to war, what they did was, let's go back to the end of this last page, miyad, immediately, Yoatzin Achitophel, they took advice from Achitophel because he was godlike in his advice. Nimlachin Sanhedrin, we schlepped that out of Benayahu because he was in charge of the slingers and the archers, or if you like, homiletically, he was over those people who had sharp, decisive wisdom and did wondrous things. And the Urim V'Tumim, that's Evyatar. Those are the wondrous things, actually, the Urim V'Tumim. Evyatar, the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara has answered Rav Yosef's question, Mikra, how do you know? Bit of a dray, if you ask me, but there you are. That's where we've got.
I can understand to some extent how they say that the three men were simultaneous, and rather than them being successive, because in the verse in Chronicles it didn't say anybody else. It didn't name the successors of anybody else, and therefore it might be assumed that because they named those three people, that they were all at the same time.
All right, let's have a look at the pasuk with that in mind. Let's go back to the pasuk and see whether your theory stands up, Julia. There is the verse again for you, verse 34. Let's just go back and read a few verses earlier just to get the context. And over the camels was Obil the Ishmaelite, and over the she-donkeys was Yehdiyahu Hameronati. Over the flocks was Yaziz. All these were over officers over King David's property. And Yehonatan, David's uncle, was a counselor, a man of understanding, and a scribe. And Yechiel, the son of Hachmoni, was with the king's son. And Achitophel was the king's counselor. And Hushai the Archite was the king's companion. And after Achitophel were Yehoiada, the son of Benayahu, and Evyatar, and the general of the king's army was Yoav. So you're right, that is the only succession that we're told. But what you're trying to say is that after they took advice from Achitophel, they also took advice from Yehoiada and Evyatar. They were second and third in line for advice. Okay, all right. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. But you wouldn't know it if you didn't know the Gemara, would you? I mean, if you hadn't learned that Gemara, that wouldn't occur to you. And in fact, the Mefarshim, apart from the Gemara, read that in its simple form, meaning that va'acharei, meaning after in chronological terms. But yeah, okay, I'm happy to take that on board. I like that. It still feels a bit of a dray to me, the whole thing, but perhaps slightly less of a dray with Julia's interpretation. Let's go back to the Gemara. Let's go back to the Gemara. Right, so now the next question is, how do you know, says Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Ada, and others say it was Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Avudini. He also asked the question, Maikra, what's your scriptural support? Now, what he's asking for, we need to go back to the story again. Remember, the story was that David was asleep. The wind came and woke him up by blowing through his kinnor, his lyre or his harp. By the way, what's kinnor in modern Hebrew? I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's a violin.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a violin. Anyway, kinnor here in biblical Hebrew, I don't think they had violins back then. Kinnor is a harp or a lyre. Anyway, he woke up at midnight and he busied himself. Look at this. Osek batorah ad sha'ala amud hashachar. Busied himself with Torah until dawn. So this rabbi now in our Gemara over the page is asking, how do you know that he got up in the middle of the night and was learning Torah until dawn? Maikra, where is your scriptural proof? And they bring a pasuk, which is very, very familiar to me and will be very familiar to anybody around about my age who went to Manchester Grammar School. And I will tell you why in a second. Here is the pasuk that it quotes. Ura kvodi, ura hanevel v'chinor, a'ira shachar. Let's go to the verse. It's a verse from Tehillim 57:9. Let me show you the verse in all its glory. There it is. There we go. Hopefully you'll have that in a sec. There you go. Verse 9. Ura kvodi, awaken my honor. Ura hanevel v'hachinor. Awaken me, lyre and harp. A'ira shachar. I will awaken the dawn. This is King David speaking, saying that he will awaken the dawn. So he's saying, awaken me, lyre and harp. Wake me up, i.e. at midnight when the wind changes, wake me up. This verse, chapter 57, verse 9 in Tehillim is, we spoke about the first radio alarm clock. This is the first Alexa, right? David is saying, Alexa, awaken me, lyre and harp, awaken me. Okay, wake me up at midnight, Alexa, and then I will awaken the dawn, meaning that I will be awake when the dawn comes because I will be busy singing your praise. Ura kvodi, ura hanevel ve'achino a'ira shachar. It's a pasuk from Tehillim. There, it's David HaMelech. If you look at the context here, it's speaking about him singing God's praise. The previous verse says, my heart is steadfast with God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing praises. Awaken my honor, awaken me, lyre and harp. I will awaken the dawn. So obviously the people in the Gemara, these rabbis, knew their Tehillim very well. And they said, how do you know that he woke up at midnight? This is the pasuk that they quote. Now, why will anybody of my age who went to Manchester Grammar School know this? Because when I was at Manchester Grammar School, there were about 200 Jewish boys out of 1,400. And the Jewish boys had their own assembly in the mornings because we didn't go into the General Assembly, which was full of hymns and Our Father who art in Trent Station and all that stuff. So we had our own Jewish assembly. And when I was a first former, when I was a sprog, the assembly was taken by one of the sixth formers. Occasionally, we would be graced with the presence of Dr. Sol Clines. Those of you that from Manchester will remember him. He was the head of chemistry, and he was a very fierce man. But the assembly was taken by one of the prefects, and the prefect that took it was a young lad at the time. He was a sixth former. He seemed like a very old sixth former to me at the time. He was called Oliver Cura, and he was the brother of my friend Michael Cura. He was an orthopedic surgeon in London, the son of Hans Cura, the dentist, who some of you may know, very famous dentist. People apparently still use something called the Cura Bridge, which he invented. Anyway, Oliver Cura was a very frum Reform Jew. And he used to go to the Reform Shul very regularly and was part of the choir and everything. And he taught the Jewish assembly, and we used to sing it every single morning, a tune which they used to sing in Jackson's Row Shul. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, or else I wouldn't have been allowed to sing it. Reform being, of course, the very worst thing you could possibly do when you were 10 and from an Orthodox family. And it went something like this: Ura, 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 kevodi, ura, 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 hanevel, hanevel, hanevel v'chino, aira shachar. Now that is the first time I have sung that, I think, since I was 15 years old. And I still remember it because we sang it every single day. I never knew it was from Tehillim. I never knew where it was from until last night. When I was preparing this shiur, and there it was, and I had all these memories of Jewish assembly in Manchester Grammar School came flooding back to me. I don't think, sadly, I don't think Oliver is still alive. One of the Curas died. I think it was him. I'm not sure. It might have been his brother. Anyway, Ura Kvodi, Ura Hanevel. Yes, for me, a very nostalgic pasuk. I remember it very, very fondly indeed, those days. So anyway, enough of that nonsense. This is the pasuk that the Gemarah tells us proves that David HaMelech woke up with his harp and his lyre at midnight to praise God. And how do you praise God? Well, you osek b'Torah, you busy yourself with Torah, as the Gemarah says. So we have now very nicely, I consider that to be a good proof, much better than the one we just did before about Achitophel and his friends. So Ura Kvodi, Ura Hanevel, V'chino A'ira Shacha. Now, if you have a look at the Mefarshim on that pasuk, there was, where was it here? They said that the other kings, there we go. In contrast to other kings who are awakened by the dawn, David awakened the dawn, i.e. he arose before dawn. That's why it says, A'ira, I will awake the dawn. Other kings, they don't wake up in the middle of the night to learn Torah, and this was a praise for David HaMelech. Okay, so there we have, that's the end of that topic. Now we've come to our little S. So rather unsatisfactorily, in my humble opinion, we have now proved that the Mishnah, what the Mishnah said. Let's just show you what we were trying to prove in the first place. Let's go back to page 9 of the Mishnah. And it was that ein motzi'in milchemet harashut ela al pi bet din shel shivim echad. What we were trying to prove, that we don't go out to war only on the basis of a court of 71 judges, i.e. the Great Sanhedrin. And we have now proved that through these rather homiletical proofs of the psukim. And I'll come to you one sec, David. So we've now proved that the Sanhedrin is required to go out to war. And we're going to move on to the next bit of the Mishnah in a second. Yes, David?
Yeah, I've got a possible entry into your book of Chidushim.
Oh, good.
Might this be a source, which I've never seen, for Tikkun Leil Shavuot? The fact that David HaMelech, who was born and died on Shavuot, according to tradition, would stay up all night, be woken up to learn Torah all night. And we do this once a year in memory of David HaMelech.
Oh, I love it. Oh, that's great. That can definitely go in Chidushei Poleg. That's great. It's a far, far better explanation than the Jews overslept on the day of Matan Torah, which, I don't think I even accepted when I was 5 years old. But yes, I like that. That's a great explanation. Yes. David HaMelech was born and died on Shavuot. He was the one that showed us how to behave by getting up in the middle of the night and learning Torah until dawn. Excellent. Oh, I need to write that down. David, do me a favor afterwards. Send me that on a WhatsApp, will you?
Okay.
And I will enter it into the folder called Chidushei Poleg. Don't know when this book's ever going to get written, but please God, one day it will get written. Excellent. Oh, I like that. Excellent.
I read in a book. It was an autobiography that after he finished studying, he went back to bed, which actually I think is what people do on Shavuot as well.
He went back to bed. Well, according to this, he got his advisors together, sent them out to war, and then went back to bed. So yeah, well, yes, we do go back to bed after we've davened, after we've been up all night. Okay, let's go on. So we have, as I say, a little bit unsatisfactorily proved that piece of Mishnah. Let's go back to the Mishnah and we'll see what the next bit of Mishnah that we're going to deal with is. The next bit of Mishnah is this. Very interesting halacha. Ein mosifin al ha'ir va'al ha'azarot ela al pi bet din shel shivim ve'echad. Same idea. Something or other can only be done with the sanction of the 71-man Sanhedrin. Now, what are we talking about? Ein mosifin. What's mosifin? What's musaf?
Additional.
Additional, right, correct. So we do not add on, we do not increase or add on al-ha'ir to the city. What city are we talking about?
Yerushalayim.
Yerushalayim. We do not add to the territory of Jerusalem the al-ha'azarot and the azarot. What word do you see in there that we have in our shuls today? What is the Hebrew expression that we use for the ladies section of the shul? Come on, Avril, you know this.
Ezrat Nashim.
Yes, very good. Ezrat Nashim, which means the ladies section or the ladies area. So we do not add on to the boundary of the city of Jerusalem. In other words, we don't extend the boundary. The al-ha'azarot, and to the courtyards, if you like, the sections of what? Of the temple, the sections of the Bet Mikdash. Ela al pi bet din shel shivim echad. If at the moment in any city, what happens is you have a city boundary, and if you build on, then your city becomes wider, doesn't it? You start with a city there, and you build around it, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Think about London. Greater London now extends like almost into 3/4 of Hertfordshire and, and most of Essex, etc. That is Greater London because you extend the boundaries as you keep on going. Now, by the way, an interesting fact. Did you know that Netanya is not the largest city in Israel? In terms of square meterage, it's not the most populous city either, but it is the longest city in Israel. Netanya, from top to bottom, is the longest city in Israel. There you are. There's a piece of useless information for you. Anyway, with regard to the temple, you cannot extend the courtyard. And you cannot extend the boundaries of Jerusalem without the permission of the Sanhedrin. Why not? Why not? Who cares how big the courtyards are? You've got a lot of people, right? We want to try and extend our Ezrat Nashim. We'll be going out to try. We've got some architects coming in to see whether we can do it, and then we'll be going out to do a fundraiser. Watch this space, and hopefully we're going to extend. We don't have to ask the Sanhedrin if we want to extend the courtyard. Just do it, assuming we've got the money. Why do we need the Sanhedrin to extend the courtyard of the temple and to extend the boundaries of Jerusalem?
Because it was planning permission.
Sorry.
Go on, Julia first. Julia?
I just think planning permission, you always need approval before you extend.
Okay, but why do you need planning permission from the Great Sanhedrin? Why not just the Jerusalem City Council? Avril.
I was going to say, because presumably there's going to be people around and it's going to be an optional wall, then you need the Sanhedrin's permission to go and take land and maybe sort of have wage war against people who are in those areas.
Okay, possibly, but that's not what it's actually talking about. This is talking about when we actually are sovereign in the land. But you're right. I suppose if that would be covered by the previous one, wouldn't it? Because we've already said you can't go out to war without the Sanhedrin. So the Mishnah wouldn't need to tell us specifically that if that was the only reason. There is a very clear reason why the Mishnah is telling us that we need the Shivim Be'echad. We need this Great Sanhedrin to change these boundaries. Any other suggestions?
Is it because there were other peoples there who were not the children of Israel?
No, that's not. That's, I think, more or less what Avril was saying, but no, that's not the case. The reason is this. When there was a Beit HaMikdash and you brought your sacrifice, you brought your korban. Let's say you'd done a naughty thing and you had to bring a korban chatat, you had to bring a sin offering, or you'd had some good news and you wanted to bring a korban todah, you wanted to bring a thanksgiving offering, or a shlamim, a peace offering, or any of the offerings that you might bring to the Beit HaMikdash. There are strict rules as to where you can eat this korban, the meat of this korban. And we do not say it in our shul anymore. I don't know if we used to, but you will have all said it in your davening back in the day when you were in Chutz Haaretz. In the korbanot section of the davening, just before Rabbi Yishmael Amar, Amar Rabbi Yishmael, the 13 exegetical principles, there is a section called Ezahu Makoman. Yeah, you remember that? Ezahu Makoman, which means where is its place? And it goes through each of the korbanot, where you can eat them. There are certain things called kodshim kalim. What's kal mean? Simple or light. Okay, so kodshim kalim are lightly holy. Those meats, there's certain korbanot. I think a shlamim, a peace offering, is kodshim kalim. Those meats can be eaten anywhere in the boundary of Jerusalem for a certain period of time, for a day and a night and a day, or a night and a day and a night, depends on which korban it is. Each korban has a set time and a set place where you can eat this korban's meat. Okay, kodshim kodoshim, the holiest of the meats, the korban chatat, for example, you can only eat in the courtyard of the temple. You're not allowed to take it out of the courtyard of the temple. So obviously, it's very important where those boundaries are, because if you suddenly extend the boundary, well, what if that was not the right boundary? You're then eating things in the wrong place, and that's a very big avera. For us, it doesn't seem that terrible because we're not used to these sacrifices and things, but it was a big deal. Sacrifices were the biggest deal out when you back in the day. You went to the temple. Imagine, you're going to the head office of God and you bring in a sacrifice and you muck it up by eating it in the wrong place. The whole thing's spoiled, and you can't do that. So it had to be extremely clear, and it had to be only decided by the 71 judges where these boundaries were. You can't just unilaterally or have some town planner decide that they're going to extend it because they've got more people, so we'll just extend the boundary a bit more. No, if you're going to extend the boundary, that means it has a knock-on effect. It has implications for the eating of holy meat. And that holy meat is, and where you can eat that, is in the realm of the Sanhedrin. These are the things that the Sanhedrin must deal with, not some town planner. So the reason that the missionary is teaching us this halacha is to teach us the importance of the place where you eat the kodshim, where you eat the holy stuff. Have a look in your art scroll or Koren Sidurim when we finish the shiur, and have a look at the translation of that section of Korbanot, which begins Ezehu Mukaman. These are their places. It's immediately before Amar Rabbi Ishmael. And have a look there. It's quite a long section because it goes through all the different Korbanot, where you can eat it. First of all, where it has to be shechted, which part of the Azara, which part of the courtyard it's to be shechted, where it can be eaten, and how long it can be eaten for. And these are very complicated halachot, and there's whole masechtot devoted to this subject. We just don't even bother saying it anymore. In a lot of places, including our shul, we jumped straight after the first Shema Yisrael and Baruch Hakadosh Shemo Barabim. We jumped straight to Omar Rabbi Yishmael. We miss it all out. But if you have a look at the translation there, you'll see it's all very complicated. And that is the reason why this Mishnah is telling us that you need the Sanhedrin of 71 to decide if there's going to be a change of border and a change of area. It has to be sanctioned by the 71-man court so that there are no mistakes made by anyone. It's like when you've got an Eruv. Right? If you've got an Eruv, it's got to be very clearly marked so that people don't make a mistake. I was once in Monsey, New York, for a wedding, and I was there for the Ufruf, and I was staying with some folk, and my kids were very little. Rena wasn't even 1 year old, so I had 5 kids under the age of 7, and we don't know, must have been mental for going, but anyway, we went. And we stayed with these people, and they said, yeah, they told us where to go. The Ufruf was in Or Sameach Yeshiva. It's just down here, you go there, and there's an Eruv all the way. So we could take the buggy, and I went with all the kids, and I'm loaded up with 2 buggies and a talus bag and a whole bunch of sweets and stuff to keep the kids quiet. And I'm walking along the street in the direction that I'm going, and I see a sign that says, the Eruv stops here. Oh, what do I do now? He told me, the guy that I'm staying with, that the Eruv goes all the way to... So either I've gone the wrong way, or he doesn't know what he's talking about, because there's a sign that says the Eruv stops here. So what do you do? Well, if you're in Monsey, New York, there's no shortage of Jews around there. So I asked a Jew that was walking along, and I said, excuse me, I was told that I'm going to Or Sameach. I was told that there's an Eruv all the way to Or Sameach, but it seems that I must be in the wrong place because it says the Eruv stops here. Can you help? He says, take no notice of that. He says, that's the Hasidische Eruv. The Litvische Eruv goes further on. So we were okay. So we took no notice of the Hasidische Eruv, and we went on and we got to Or Sameach, and all was well. But you have to have a sign where the Eruv starts and where the Eruv ends. And so here, even more importantly, you're eating kodshim, you've got to know where you're eating the kodshim, and you've got to know where the boundary of Jerusalem is, where you're allowed to eat the kodshim kalim, You've got to know where the boundary of the Azara, of the area in the Beit HaMikdash is that you can eat the Kodoshim. So there you go. That is why the Mishnah has brought this halacha that 71-man Sanhedrin, the top Supreme Court, has to make this decision, not some little trumped-up town planner. So that's the Mishnah, and we'll just have a quick look before we finish at the Gemara and what the Gemara is going to say. So the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Ve'ein mosifin ala, we don't extend the city of Jerusalem, etc. Of course, we're meant to know the rest of the Mishnah without turning right back. And then we ask our favorite question, Mina hane mili. How do you know? Where is your scriptural proof for the fact that we need a 71-man Sanhedrin? And we will go and look at this next week. This is what we will look at next week. The Gemara will attempt to find a proof, a scriptural proof for that which makes sense, that the 71-man Sanhedrin had to sanction any extension to Jerusalem or extension to the temple courtyards for the reason that we've said. This is the next piece of Gemara that we're going to do, and we're going to be quoting a pasuk over here in Shemot 25, as you can see. I did get it ready, but we haven't got time to go to it today. So we will stop there. Any questions on today's shiur? No? Excellent. Well, let's just recap what we did today. We finished off the idea of Achitophel, Benayaha ben Yehoyada, all the other way around, and Evyatar. We showed that Benayahu was in fact in charge of the Sanhedrin, a bit of a dray, to use this pasuk, kreti or pleti, which clearly in its context refers to the army. And then Evyatar, who was the Kohen Gadol, refers to the Urim Betumim. And so we've proved rather tenuously in my view, but we proved what we were looking to prove. And then we asked another pasuk, how do you know David HaMelech got up at midnight with his harp, waking him up? We had Oliver Cura's wonderful rendition of Ura Kvodi, Ura Hanevel from Tehillim, and we had a candidate for Chidushay Poleg, that Tikkun Leil Shavuot comes from this pasuk. David HaMelech, whose yortzeit is on Shavuot, got up at night and was osek batorah, and was learning Torah. We liked that very much, and we quoted the pasuk, the Mishnah, which said we don't add on to the city or to the courtyard except with the 71-man Sanhedrin sanction, and that's where we'll carry on for next week.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Johnny.